Most feared bounty hunter found a wounded girl hiding in his barn. What he did next shocked the whole town. The wind moaned low through the pines lining the edge of Dry Creek Valley, brushing ice against the walls of Ben Sterling's remote ranch. Winter had come early, sharpening every edge of the land with frost and silence. Snow clung to the mountains like the ghosts of old battles, and the night pressed down with a weight that made the stars feel further away than ever. Ben had just finished chopping firewood when something strange unsettled his evening rhythm. It was not a sound so much as the absence of one, a stillness that did not belong. He paused at the barn door, lantern in hand, the glow spilling gold onto packed snow. His boots creaked on the boards as he stepped inside. What he saw stopped him cold. There, half buried in straw, was a splash of raven-black hair against a mound of golden hay. The girl, no woman, was crumpled like a broken thing, her limbs askew, her buckskin dress torn and blood dark at the waist. Her skin was the deep sun-warmed bronze of the Comanche, but she was ice-pale, her breath shallow and sharp. One arm jerked weakly, and her other hand gripped the handle of a knife, though the blade had snapped in half. Ben's first instinct was the one long buried by years of hardened solitude: protect. He knelt slowly, placing the lantern beside him, one palm raised. "If I wanted to kill you," he said quietly, "I would not have lit the fire first." The girl did not speak. Her dark eyes shimmered with fear, locked onto him like an animal expecting the blow. She raised the broken blade, but her hand trembled so badly it fell from her grasp with a soft clink. Ben eased back, shrugging off his coat and laying it gently over her shoulders. Her lips were cracked, her body shaking. When his fingers brushed her brow, the heat startled him, fever and bad. He looked at her again. This was no drifter, no thief. She had not come here to steal his livestock or his food. She had come here to die. Not tonight. He slipped his arms beneath her, lifting her gently. She weighed nothing, just bones and fire, a body fighting to stay in this world. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he walked toward the cabin with sure, steady steps. Inside, the room had changed little in 5 years. A single bed sat against the far wall, untouched since Martha and Tim passed. The hearth glowed with slow-burning pine, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Ben laid her on the narrow mattress, careful not to jostle the wound. He stripped his own shirt into clean strips and boiled water in a cast-iron pot. Her side was raw and ugly, a gunshot recent and messy. He cleaned it with carbolic soap, her face twisting with unconscious pain, but she did not wake. Not once did he ask who she was, not why she was running, or from whom. He worked in silence. When the bandages were done, he sat in the old rocker, staring at the fire while the storm outside whispered like a voice too far to reach. His rifle leaned against the wall. Her faint breathing filled the room like something sacred. And just like that, the years of silence cracked open. A woman, hurt and hunted, lay in the only bed he owned. A Comanche in the home of a man who once hunted men like her. He did not know her name. He did not know what storm she brought to his doorstep. But Ben Sterling, feared bounty hunter turned ghost of Dry Creek, had carried her into his cabin. And somewhere between the wind and the warmth, something long dead in him stirred. He did not sleep that night. He sat and watched and waited. Because death had come to his land before. But this felt like life trying to return. And for reasons he could not yet name, he was not ready to let it die. She woke as if dragged from drowning, her body stiff with pain and cold. The ceiling above her was wooden, cracked, a low beam overhead wrapped in the shadows of dawn. For a moment she did not remember where she was. Then her eyes flared wide and she shot up, only to fall back with a cry, clutching her side. The pain was sharp but not fresh. Someone had cleaned the wound. Someone had stitched and wrapped it. She blinked through the dim light. The room was unfamiliar, though not cruel. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. The air smelled of broth and smoke, not blood. The blankets beneath her were scratchy wool. The scent of man clung faintly to them, sweat, pine soap, tobacco. A man. She jerked her head toward the sound of boots outside. A figure passed the window, tall, broad-shouldered. Her breath quickened. Her hands moved instinctively, no knife, no strength, just the ache in her ribs and the pounding of a heart trained too long to fear. When he entered, she froze. He did not speak. Ben Sterling set down a bowl of soup on the small table beside the bed. Steam curled into the cold morning air. He placed a cup of water next to it, then stepped back, nodding once. His face, lined and quiet, betrayed nothing. He did not approach her, did not demand her name, did not cage her with questions. He turned and walked out. Later, when the sun climbed higher, he came in again, this time with clean bandages. She flinched when he reached for her, but his hands were slow, deliberate. He changed the dressing without speaking, without meeting her gaze, as though sensing the weight of her silence. On the third morning, he left something else behind. It was not food, not water, not firewood. It was a comb. Old, wooden, carved with small faded flowers. It had once belonged to someone who cared about beauty or tenderness or the morning ritual of taming wind-blown hair. She stared at it for a long time. When she was sure he would not return soon, she lifted it. Her hands were shaking, her fingers ached. But she dragged the teeth gently through her matted hair, pausing over each knot with a grimace of pain. She did not cry. She had not cried in years. When she finished, she placed it back in the exact spot he had left it, turned just so. The next morning, it was gone. The next day, it returned. Neither of them spoke of it. In the evenings, she watched him from the bed while pretending to sleep. He would sit by the fire, carving something with his knife, or cleaning a rifle she recognized from nightmares. But his hands were careful, not cruel. Once he caught her looking. He did not smile. He just dipped his head slightly and turned back to his work. She began to nod when he offered soup. She did not pull away when he checked her bandages. She let her hand brush his by accident and did not flinch. The silence between them grew warmer. Not yet trust. Not yet safety. But no longer fear. And then came the night when the snow whispered against the roof and the wind sighed through the pine like a lullaby. She lay curled beneath the blankets, staring into the firelight. He brought her a mug of warm water as he always did, and set it down gently. She looked at him. He paused. She opened her mouth dry, unused, and a single word fell like a stone into the quiet. Asha. It was not a name from this land. It was a name from dust and wind, from the sun-baked canyons and the songs of women long buried. Ben froze. Then he nodded once. Asha. He would not ask if it was her name. He would not ask where she came from, or what she ran from. Not yet. Because in that one word she had given him more than enough. She had chosen to speak. And that, in this house of silence, was the first miracle. The fire crackled low as snow gathered against the windowpane. Ben sat sharpening his knife, each stroke slow, steady. Across the room, Asha sat on the floor by the hearth, her legs tucked under her, combing through a bowl of beans with careful fingers. Her skin had regained color, her movements more fluid each day, but her eyes still held shadows too deep for sleep to touch. "Do you know why they want me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ben's knife paused mid-stroke. He looked up, waiting. "They think I remember it. The way through the canyons, where the red rocks bleed gold." He said nothing, but his brow furrowed. "It is not just a map," she said. "It is a story. My grandfather told it with sand and stone. He showed me where the stars align with the cliffs, where the river splits beneath the cedar roots. They think it leads to a mine, a hidden place where the mountain holds gold." Ben set the knife down slowly. "And does it?" he asked. She met his eyes. "It leads to something, but not what they want." There was silence, heavy and thoughtful. "Briggs," she added after a moment. "The man who led them, a colonel or something close. White mustache, cold eyes. He ordered my village burned when we would not speak." Ben leaned back in his chair, face unreadable. The name struck like a flint against old stone. "Briggs is not a colonel," he said at last. "Not anymore. Got drummed out of the army years ago. But he still wears the coat. Uses the weight of it to take what he wants." Asha watched him closely. "You know him?" Ben's jaw flexed. "I was a scout once. For the army. A long time ago. I saw what he did in the territories. Took orders I could not follow. Then you left." "I left," he said, and the words came like stones from a dry well. The wind groaned against the cabin. Asha drew the blanket closer around her shoulders. "I have not told anyone," she said. "Not even the women at the mission before I ran. They would not have believed me. They said I was sick with fevered dreams." Ben shook his head. "I believe you." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "Why?" He did not answer right away. Then, quietly, "Because I know the sound of a truth that hurts to carry." A few days passed in quiet routine. Asha helped with simple chores now, gathering firewood, sweeping the porch, washing tin plates by the creek. Ben gave her space, but watched everything. Then came the knock. Not at the cabin. At the post station 2 ridges south, where Ben traded pelts and rare letters passed. A rider, nameless and unfamiliar, asked the clerk a question that made the man uneasy. "Where's that bounty hunter? The one used to live out Dry Creek way?" The clerk, old and careful, mentioned nothing about Ben. But when Ben heard it, when the rumor traveled by breath and boot print, he felt the cold set in deeper than any snow. He rode back hard, eyes sharp, hands tense on the reins. That night he moved through the dark, hammering new boards across the barn, checking the rifle oil, stringing a bell wire along the outer fence. Asha watched him from the porch. No questions, no protest. When he reached the corral, he paused. The bay mare had chewed through her lead rope again. He cursed under his breath and went to tie it anew, but another hand was already there. Asha. She knelt beside him, fingers deft with the leather. She tied a knot tight, sure. His hand brushed hers as he moved to help, and for the first time neither of them pulled away. Their eyes met. In the still of the corral, under the sweep of stars, the silence between them shifted. Not fear, not obligation. Something gentler. She rose without a word, dusting her skirt, and walked back to the house. Ben watched her go, his hands still wrapped around the rope she had left warm in his grasp. Behind him, the wind stirred the pine. And somewhere out there, he knew, Briggs was coming. Ben taught her how to hold the rifle first. Not to kill, he made that clear, but to know she could stand her ground if the dark ever came clawing. Her hands were still healing, fingers bandaged and stiff, but she held the stock steady, jaw tight, eyes narrowed with focus. Finger here, Ben said quietly, guiding her touch. And never aim unless you mean to stop what you see. Asha nodded. She listened always with that intense stillness of someone who had learned to survive by becoming invisible. But here, under the weak winter sun, her silence began to feel less like fear and more like trust. He showed her how to saddle a horse, how to follow hoofprints in dry earth, how to pitch a tent between wind and shadow. She learned fast. Quick-footed and sharp-eyed, Asha moved like a creature who had always known the language of the land but had never been taught how to walk in safety. Until now. In turn, she gave him her knowledge, gifts without words. One night she reached up to the sky and hummed a melody older than any hymn he knew. Her voice, soft as smoke, followed the stars, naming each one in her tongue, tracing lines in constellations Ben had seen all his life but never really understood. North, she said, pointing to a gleaming cluster. And home, if you ever forget. Ben, whose sense of direction had been earned through maps and marches, said nothing. But he looked up, memorizing what she showed him. For once he was the student. Then came the boot prints. They found them near the creek, deep and deliberate. A lone rider, judging by the stride, someone heavy on the left foot and cautious in the right. Whoever it was had circled the cabin's edge, never approaching, but close enough to see everything. Ben squatted near the tracks, his face grim. Asha stood behind him, fingers tight around the rifle sling he had made her. He left no campfire, Ben muttered. Didn't want to be seen. They spent that night in the barn. The wind whistled through cracks in the wood, rattling the loose latch with every gust. Asha and Ben lay side by side in the hay, rifles across their chests, listening for footsteps that never came. Neither slept. But in that shared silence, something changed. The next morning, as Ben fed the horses and checked the perimeter, he noticed something new hanging from the barn door, a thin string of beads and carved wood. The shapes were small, delicate, strung together with care. It swayed gently in the breeze, clicking like bones, like time. He did not ask her what it meant, but he did not take it down. Later she caught him looking at it. For the first time, Asha smiled, just a flicker, fleeting as a hawk's shadow. They did not speak of the boot prints again, but each day afterward Ben checked his traps twice. He refilled the lanterns before nightfall. He left firewood stacked inside the cabin instead of out. And Asha began to leave more signs, a feather placed on the windowsill, a small braid tied to the post by the gate. Markings, warnings, pieces of her world stitched into his. One afternoon she reached for the saddle cinch and her fingers brushed Ben's. Both froze. Their eyes met over the leather strap. Neither spoke, but something in that brief touch echoed louder than any words. Not yet love, but recognition. That night, as they sat by the fire, Asha handed Ben a carved token made of bone and stone, 2 interlocking circles. She placed it in his calloused palm, closed his fingers around it, and simply said, protection. Ben held it for a long time after she had gone to sleep, not because he believed in magic, but because he believed in her. The snow was melting, but the cold still held its grip on the valley. Ben had just come back from checking the eastern traps when he saw 3 riders on the ridge. One wore a blue coat, the other 2 dressed in dust-stained grays, the kind mercenaries favored. They rode like men who knew how to kill. Ben stood still in the yard, hand resting on the butt of his rifle. Asha, watching from the cabin window, stepped back into the shadows. The lead rider dismounted slowly, brushing snow from his shoulder, as if the land itself annoyed him. He wore a lieutenant's insignia, though the brass looked freshly polished, like a badge borrowed for show. "Sterling," he called out, voice slick with official arrogance. "Lieutenant Colonel Briggs, United States Army. I have orders to take a fugitive from your custody." Ben didn't answer. He let the silence stretch until it wrapped tight around the three strangers. Briggs lifted a folded paper, signed by Judge Holloway himself. "This woman is suspected of treason, theft, and withholding federal property, namely, a map to government minerals buried in these hills." Ben took a step forward. "This land's private. No flag flies here but the wind. You've got 5 seconds to get off my porch." One of the men, young, nervous, tightened his grip on his pistol. Briggs raised a hand to still him. "We do not need trouble, Mr. Sterling. But if you are harboring the girl known as Asha, you are in direct violation of military order. She may have fooled you with her stories, but her people have shed soldier blood." Ben's jaw tightened. "I know what blood smells like, Colonel, and I remember yours from New Mexico, 67. Briggs blinked. "You served?" Ben nodded once. "Scout. Until I saw what your kind did to villages with no men left standing." The silence that followed had weight. Briggs lowered his tone. "I'll offer this only once. Step aside. Let us search." Ben cocked his rifle. "This ranch don't recognize orders soaked in innocent blood." The second gunman, a squat, bearded man, suddenly stepped forward and drew his revolver. "To hell with this," he muttered, and fired a shot into the air. It was a warning, but Ben responded like thunder. His bullet struck the man's hat clean off, spinning it into the snow. The echo cracked across the valley, and the man dropped his weapon in shock, hands up. Briggs cursed. "Fall back." The three turned their horses quickly, retreating up the trail. But before disappearing over the ridge, Briggs turned in the saddle and pointed a gloved finger back at Ben. "This isn't over. We'll come back. And we'll bring hell with us." Ben watched them ride off without a word, his rifle lowered but his eyes burned. Later that night he opened a worn drawer in the cabin and took out a small wooden cross. The edges were smooth from time, the twine still knotted just as Martha had made it. For years it had rested beside his bed, untouched, half forgotten in grief. He stepped outside, breath fogging in the cold, and nailed the cross above the cabin door. Then he turned and picked up something else from the wall, a small bow Asha had made from elkwood, strung with sinew, adorned with beads and feathers. He placed it beside the cross. 2 symbols, 2 lives, side by side on the doorframe like guardians against the coming storm. Inside, Asha stood at the hearth, her face unreadable. When he turned, she met his eyes. She said nothing. But she walked to the door, reached up, and ran her fingers along both items, cross and bow. Then she whispered something in Kamanka, a blessing maybe, or a prayer. That night they sat by the fire longer than usual. No words passed between them, but the silence was full. Ben polished his rifle with steady hands. Asha sharpened a flint blade. Outside, the wind howled like wolves on the hunt. They both knew Briggs would return. But now, they would meet him together. The wind shifted on the second morning after Briggs' visit. It came down from the north, dry and sharp, carrying with it the scent of change, the kind men and animals alike could feel in their bones. Ben stood by the fence post he was repairing when he saw the first rider crest the hill. It was Tom Rourke from the eastern flats, a wiry man with a limp and a face like sun-baked leather. Behind him came 3 more, the O'Neill's father and son, hauling a wagon stacked with fencing wire and sacks of something wrapped in burlap. By sundown there were 8 men and 2 women gathered in Ben Sterling's yard, and more on the way. They did not ask questions. They only nodded, spat into the dirt, and got to work. "We ain't forgot the calves you pulled out that bog last spring," one said. "Nor the winter you gave up half your grain when our stores ran dry," said another. Ben tried to speak, but a wiry woman named Elma, who ran goats near the canyon edge, just handed him a hammer. "No time for speeches. We got holes to plug." Asha watched from the porch, wrapped in her fur shawl, unsure what to make of it. These were white settlers, the kind who usually crossed the street when she passed. But here they were, unloading tools, driving posts, hauling stones. One brought jars of pickled beets. Another had old dynamite, wrapped carefully in wax paper. No one looked her in the eye, but no one turned her away either. That night, as the wind screamed through the valley like a chorus of banshees, they lit a fire in the clearing. A stew pot simmered, and someone passed a flask. The laughter was rough, uncertain, like muscles long unused, suddenly stretched again. Ben stood near the edge of it all, arms crossed, unsure if he belonged. Then Elma approached Asha, holding out a square of red wool. "It's old," she said, "but warm. My hands ain't much good anymore, but I can still weave." Asha took it slowly, eyes wide. The pattern was simple, Comanche diamonds stitched in. "I saw a blanket like that once," Elma said softly, "before the fort burned it." Asha wrapped the scarf around her shoulders and nodded, lips pressed together. For a moment, something passed between the two women. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of something close. Ben saw it all, standing in the half-shadow. His hands were rougher than most men's, but they trembled a little as he rubbed them together. Later, when the fire was down to glowing coals and the stars above were sharp as cut glass, he sat beside Asha on the porch. "You did this," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. He shook his head. "No, it was done long before. I just never knew it." The silence held for a time. Then he turned to her, voice graveled deep and steady. "I have spent years breathing, eating, sleeping. But that's just surviving, living. I forgot what that felt like." Asha looked at him, eyes shining in the starlight. She did not speak. Ben reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oiled cloth. A compass. It was old, the glass scratched, the needle a little twitchy, but it still pointed north. "My boy gave me this, before he passed. Told me, so you'll never be lost, Pa." I didn't believe him. Thought the world was nothing but circles. He handed it to her. But maybe I was just walking the wrong trail. Asha turned it in her hands, then looked up. "We're not alone anymore." Ben nodded. "No, not anymore." Above them, the moon rose over Dry Creek, casting silver light on the fences, the tools, the people curled in bedrolls beneath the stars. The storm would come, but for once, Ben Sterling was ready. And this time he had something worth standing for. The sun had barely risen over the frost-laced peaks when the first riders appeared on the ridge. Ben Sterling had been watching since before dawn, crouched behind the slatted shadows of his barn's upper loft. He counted the silhouettes, 10 men, heavily armed, their horses tense beneath them. At the front rode Briggs, his cavalry coat flaring behind him like a black flag of doom. In the house, Asha tied her hair back with deliberate calm. She knew this was coming. For days now the air had carried a warning, and the animals had grown restless. The valley was too still. She grabbed her bow, slung the quiver over her shoulder, and climbed to the roof through the hidden attic hatch Ben had built for her. Ben, from his post in the barn, gave her a subtle nod. It was time. The gang dismounted as they neared the ranch fence. Briggs raised his hand. "Ben Sterling," he called out, "I've got no quarrel with you. Hand over the girl. You get to live another day." Ben remained silent. Asha exhaled slowly, set an arrow. The first shot came not from the invaders but from the barn. Ben's rifle cracked through the morning chill, striking a rifle clean from a man's hands before he even knew he was targeted. Panic rippled through the group. Then, from above, Asha's arrow whistled down and lodged in the thigh of another. Briggs roared, "Fire!" The valley erupted in chaos. Gunfire flashed, horses screamed. Ben moved through the shadows of the barn like a ghost, firing, ducking, reloading. Each shot was deliberate, controlled. The man who once hunted the deadliest men in the West hadn't lost his edge. Asha was a blur on the rooftop, her arrows fast and unerring. She moved with the grace of wind through trees and the fury of a storm. Her voice, silent until now, rang out with a cry not of fear, but of resistance. They held for an hour, but the numbers were against them. Smoke choked the air. A shed near the corral caught fire. Briggs, flanked by 2 bruisers, found an opening and stormed the cabin. Ben, bleeding from a graze to the arm, tried to cut them off, but was tackled hard from behind. His rifle skittered out of reach. As he fought the man pinning him down, Briggs kicked open the cabin door. Inside, Asha turned, bow raised, but a blow from behind knocked it from her hands. One of Briggs' men grabbed her by the hair, yanking her upright. Briggs stepped forward, sneering. "You know why I'm here. That map, that gold. Tell me where it is, girl." Asha, blood running from a cut on her temple, said nothing. Briggs raised his pistol. "You think this rancher's going to save you? He's dying out there." Just as he pulled the hammer back, the door burst open. Ben stood there, bloodied, eyes blazing. "No," he said. "I'm not dead yet." Briggs spun and fired. The shot hit Ben square in the side. He fell to his knees but kept coming. Asha screamed. With the last of his strength, Ben tackled Briggs. They crashed into the table, the gun clattering away. The two rolled, fists swinging, blood flying. Briggs reached for a knife, but Asha was there. She picked up the fallen revolver, heavy in her hands. Briggs turned, surprised. "You should have run," he said. "I did," she whispered. "But not anymore." She pulled the trigger. Briggs fell backwards, disbelief frozen on his face. Outside, the remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader fall and knowing what awaited, dropped their weapons and fled. The silence after was deafening. Ben lay still, blood pooling beneath him. Asha dropped the gun and ran to him, hands shaking. She tore open his shirt, pressed cloth to the wound. His eyes fluttered. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he murmured. "Didn't think. You'd save me right back." She laughed through her tears. "Now we're even." "No," he whispered. "Now we begin." She pressed her forehead to his, hands firm on his chest. Outside, the wind shifted. The smoke began to clear. The war was over. And in its place, something fragile, something real had taken root. The snows melted slower that year, but by early spring, Dry Creek stirred with a new kind of life. The bloodstains on the porch had long been scrubbed away, the bullet holes patched. And yet, what remained, etched into the wooden beams, the stones of the chimney, and the wind that curled through the pines, was something no fire could erase. Hope. Asha moved through the ranch with calm purpose, her braid swinging against her back, her hands calloused not from battle, but from teaching. By mid-spring, the south barn had been converted into a one-room schoolhouse. The benches were crude, the blackboard salvaged from an abandoned depot, but the children, Comanche, settler, half-blood, sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes wide with curiosity and the promise of something bigger than fear. She taught them letters and stories, songs of stars and seasons, and the sacred meanings behind simple words. Ben, his side still aching from the wound Briggs had given him, walked slower now but with steadier steps. He'd rebuilt the horse shed, adding thick walls and a stone hearth to serve as a winter lodge for the travelers who came now, quiet souls with nowhere else to go. Some were young boys who had fled conscription. Others were women who had run from cruel husbands. Some, like Asha once had been, were being hunted for the blood that ran in their veins. No one was turned away. At the front of the property, just past the rise where the old fence had splintered, a new sign swung gently in the breeze. Carved with care, the wood read, "Sterling Refuge." It wasn't a town, it wasn't a mission, but it was safe. One evening, when the air turned golden and the creek murmured softly beneath the cottonwoods, Ben and Asha sat side by side on the front steps. The stars had begun to prick the sky, and a cool wind tousled her hair across her cheek. Ben reached for her hand. His fingers, rough and scarred, closed over hers with care. "You never told me how you memorized the whole path to that canyon," he said. Asha smiled faintly. "I was raised to carry more than memory. We carry meaning, too." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that needed no filling. Ben looked up at the sky, then back at her. His voice was quieter now, hushed but sure. "You saved my life," he said. She turned to him, brow furrowed gently. "You mean when I stitched you up?" He shook his head. "No, long before that." He looked at her like a man seeing the world anew. "You saved me the moment you stayed. Not by a bullet, not by fire, but by showing me how to be alive again. By being here." Asha's eyes shimmered in the starlight. There were no vows exchanged, no ceremonies, just the warmth of her hand in his, the soft thud of hooves in the distance, and the stars stretching wide over the valley. In a world that had taken so much, they had made something fragile, lasting, and entirely their own. And in that quiet, under a sky older than pain or vengeance, Ben Sterling finally understood what it meant not just to survive, but to live. If this story stirred your heart, if you felt the silence between two broken souls turn into something unspoken and sacred, then you already understand what we believe here at Wild West Love Stories. Love was never easy in the frontier. It was carved from dust, guarded by bullets, and whispered beneath starlight. Ben and Asha's story reminds us that even in the loneliest corners of the land, a hand extended can change everything. If you want more stories where hearts beat louder than gunfire, where redemption rides alongside romance, and where every ending leaves behind a long echo, then subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a tale. Until next time, may your trails be wild, and your love unforgettable.